Hello and welcome to Feralthinker's podcast on streaming television with the cord cut. This is podcast number 3 for the 4th of July 2016, your day of independence in a profoundly and precisely controlled world. Today we're going to talk about Mr. Robot, Naked Lunch, and getting back to the future. Today, to meet my target for readiness for the second season of Mr. Robot, I should be watching episode 1.2. I find myself already so engrossed in the series that it feels like the 10th episode instead of the second. The chaos of the society at large, along with the massive robber baron corporations of unlimited power, create a feeling far more real than the reality painted normally by television programs. I mentioned previously how something on which I can't quite put my finger reminds me of Fight Club. I did notice one obvious parallel, though. The hacktivists, led by Mr. Robot, played by Christian Slater, aims to cancel all debts by attacking the large corporation E-Corp, and that's exactly what the narrator Ed Norton did at the end of Fight Club when he and the Space Monkeys dynamited all those buildings. It's no accident that the logo for E-Corp is almost identical to that of the Enron Corporation, except that the E is tilted in the opposite direction. It's no accident that the guy trying to recruit Elliot on the inside of E-Corp, the guy who is now the acting CTO or Chief Technology Officer, is named Tyrell. In Blade Runner, the Tyrell Corporation was the massive corporate entity that manufactured replicants. The attentive viewer has the paranoid feeling that replicants had indeed replaced most of the human race. Mr. Robot is basically a simple TV program with a paranoia dial set at 10. Not sure how you're going to make it back to work tomorrow after this weekend of independence. Could call in and resign tomorrow. It just takes a minute, but Netflix has a way back. Back to the Future Part 2, and Back to the Future Part 3. You can watch those tonight, all starring time travelers Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd. And hey, pick me up a real hoverboard while you're out there. HBO has David Cronenberg's cinematic adaptation of William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch, which is by nature a wonderfully countercultural film dealing with issues that are scarcely touched upon by any other forms of cinema, not the least of which is the idea that the entire world is a lie and that everything anybody believes is a lie. The film opens with a quote from Vladimir Bartol's novel Alamut. The quote is attributed to the historical character in the novel Hassan Isaba. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. Burroughs was, along with Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, one of the principal members of the Beat Generation literary movement, a group that nebulously includes a dozen or two writers, but that centers clearly around Burroughs, Ginsberg, and Kerouac. Burroughs's work is considered postmodernist and paranoid fiction, which is a post-dystopian literary genre in which a society is illusory because it is controlled by a powerful force that uses lies to manipulate its people. Think of The Matrix, for example. To make short a story longer than this podcast allows, after legal and mental health problems shake hard the lives of William S. Burroughs and his common law wife Joan Vollmer, each helping to get the other out of one form of detention or another, they wind up in Mexico City, where Burroughs plans to ride out the statute of limitations on a drug charge in Louisiana that would have sent him to Angola State Prison. I don't think anybody ever comes out of there, do they? Unfortunately, the couple are unhappy with Mexico and with each other. One night at a party in an American-owned bar in Mexico City, an intoxicated Burroughs pulls his handgun from his travel bag and announces, "It's time for our William Tell act," though they have never played such a game before. Joan nevertheless obliges him by balancing her cocktail glass on top of her head. Burroughs aims, fires and misses. Instead, he hits Vollmer in the head, and she dies almost immediately. That actually happened. Wikipedia says, Vollmer's daughter, Julie Adams, went to live with her grandmother, and William S. Burroughs, Jr. went to St. Louis to live with his grandparents. Burroughs reported every Monday morning to the jail in Mexico City, while his prominent Mexican attorney worked to resolve the case. According to James Grauer-Holtz, 2 witnesses had agreed to testify that the gun had fired accidentally while he was checking to see if it was loaded, with ballistics experts bribed to support this story. Nevertheless, the trial was continuously delayed, and Burroughs began to write what would eventually become the short novel Queer while awaiting his trial. Upon Burroughs' attorney fleeing Mexico in light of his own legal problems, involving a car accident and an altercation with the son of a government official, Burroughs decided to skip and returned to the United States. He was convicted in absentia of homicide and was given a 2-year suspended sentence. That's the end of the Wikipedia quote. He got off pretty easy, I would say. In his introduction to Queer, Burroughs says he is, quote, forced to the appalling conclusion that I never would have become a writer but for Joan's death, and to a realization of the extent to which this event has motivated and formulated my writing. I live with the constant threat of possession and a constant need to escape from possession, from control. So the death of Joan brought me in contact with the invader, the ugly spirit, and maneuvered me into a lifelong struggle in which I have had no choice except to write my way out. End quote from Burroughs in the introduction to Queer, as quoted in Wikipedia. Well into Burroughs' 4-year writing-obsessed tenure in Tangier, Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac come to visit. All around Burroughs' room they find piles and piles of papers, and they take these up to the roof to sort through them, and through their editing of Burroughs' writing, the novel Naked Lunch is born. The novel is a fantasia on the elements of Burroughs' life, the work as an exterminator and the brown powder which takes on heroin-like qualities. Most of all, the work is haunted by the William Tell Act as a motif, and in the fictional representation of Jane Bowles. But as a fantasia, Joan Vollmer continues to live. Death has not erased her, but merely transported her to the interzone. Few literary works have involved such a weighty working out of a man's grief. In his past, Burroughs had worked in Chicago as an exterminator, and the insecticide doubles as a heroin-like addictive brown powder. That powder ironically proves to be much more about pleasure for both the people and the bugs who indulge in it. The powder and the bugs provide a component in the complex of symbols that carry Burroughs' drama. Giant insects that at the same time are typewriters, and the intelligence of the machine plays a role in the writing so that the whole apparatus of writing becomes a self-conscious part of the story. It's definitely the kind of film that only Cronenberg can make, and I think he did a wonderful job. It really does a fine job of conveying the alleyways and bazaars of Morocco, but most of all, I think it does a great job of capturing the heavy weight of guilt that Burroughs carried around inside of him. Anyway, I highly recommend that if you're in the mood for a bit of countercultural fantasy, to check out Naked Lunch on HBO. That's it for today's podcast. Thanks so much for listening. You can follow this program through my blog at dmasonwest.com, or you can follow along through any of my social network presences, which are listed at Feralthinker.com. This podcast is published daily with a release at 4 p.m. Central U.S. time, or 2100 hours Greenwich Mean Time. Thanks.